Today we gather to talk about the tower. Doesn't look so bad, kind of. Uh, yeah,
Not in that depiction.
yeah. Like she's on a hill. There's some kind of waves. There's some fire behind her, a little lightning, and a rainbow above. That's pretty sweet. I like the rainbow, and a little fire in her belly. I like that. Okay. Okay. Does anyone have the Rider-Waite? Because I don't have it with me.
Yeah, you guys want to see some more drama?
Yes.
I bring you
Always.
drama
Ah.
from the Rider-Waite.
Yeah.
Lightning, just like in your one.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh no, that side, lightning.
Yeah. And then what's happening
Um,
with the people?
they are falling to their death and rebirth, I assume. Uh, yeah, they don't look too happy about it either. They're like screaming. And there's a crown on top of the tower that's like been exploded off.
Mm.
Um, it looks like bad news, guys.
Yeah, it does look like bad news.
And then the um
Ooh, oh, I love
the
that one.
Thoth is beautiful.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
It's visually my favorite card in the deck, I think. And I love what she's done with combining the different sort of styles of like this is so brutal and like it's different styles of illustration on one card. And then up here is much more like and this is almost like abstract. You can see the people falling in this one, just like in the
Mm.
Rider-Waite, but they've almost been reduced to just sort of like geometric shapes.
It's very collage-esque. It kind of has a collage
Yeah,
to it. Yeah.
I think that's why I love it so much.
Yeah. And is that like a serpent or a dragon in the
It's
a
this
serpent?
guy, it's Abraxas.
What's that?
He's all over the Thoth. Well, maybe not, but I think he's at least in a couple of cards. He's like a snake with a lion's head. And he is a god from what pantheon? I don't really remember, probably Egyptian and Crowley. And although it doesn't sound very Egyptian, but who knows? Um, and he is all about unifying good and evil and dark and light. And he
Mm.
might not even be a he, I'm just saying he, because this one looks masculine. It's probably beyond gender, really. And then we have, but that said, there's a dove on this side,
Mm.
representing like love and Aphrodite and all that stuff. And maybe some Christian stuff in there as well, like hope. I don't know. And then this is the eye of
Horse?
Shiva or Horus or both. And the idea is that when it opens, all is revealed and therefore all is destroyed.
That's a powerful line. All is revealed and all is destroyed. Therefore, all is destroyed.
Yeah, that's the vibe I got from just flipping through the book on the Thoth deck. I think that's kind of what the card is about. It's about a revelation. And I looked up the etymology of the word apocalypse, and it comes from uncover. I was like, okay, yeah, that's what we're in for.
Well, I did notice at the bottom of that Thoth card is Mars, just Mars. So like usually his shows like Mars and I think a sign also. So, but there was also that symbol at the bottom that's a Hebrew symbol that's
Yeah,
Te, and it's like the mouth. And from what I read, it's something to do with how the mouth can be harmful or helpful, just depending on the words that are used. So it's like gentle, kind words in creation, because Mars is about creation and building, versus, yeah, sharp, terrible words.
Mm.
So I don't know if anybody else
well,
got
there's
anything
kind of a
about
mouth
mouth.
at the bottom there, like
Hmm.
that. Like there's like an angry Moor there shooting flames out. So I think it might be the second type of words.
I was reading from the Rider-Waite one. The yacht. Are there yachts falling off that one, Rebecca? Like these little kind of leafy looking things?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. Little,
yacht,
they're kind of yellow.
yes. And I read that those are yods, which are I think it's like the first word of God or like the first letter of God.
Mm.
And on one
Okay.
side there's 10, which they said that kind of in ancient times, 10 was 10 fingers and that represented the physical world. So, 10 fingers, physicality. And then on the other side, there's 12 of those yods. and 12 represents spirituality because that's the astrological. So like that's the 12 signs, right? So the 10 yods is about the physical, and then the 12 yods is about the spiritual. And then 22 is the major arcana. And kind of this is Rachel Paul's interpretation of saying that those yods, they're falling off the thing, like the people are obviously falling to some sort of death or transformation. And but the yods are sort of a recognition of grace within all of that. Maybe that's kind of part of the dove, that within the fall and the collapse and the revelation, there's obviously, this card evokes a lot of like stress, tension, like squeeze, but that in that stress and tension is a kind of grace, and there's a grace in that kindness to that transformative process. Yeah, it's shocking. It's a shocking kind of card, the revelation, the reveal, shocking to it. The thunder.
That's my one reservation about the Thoth. There's no lightning on here.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think is a real shame, because I think the lightning's really important in I think we talked about lightning in one of the other cards, actually, about how it's destructive but also fructifying. So it's like, or that might have just been a private conversation, I don't know. I'm losing track now. But like, I think the lightning is really important, because it also obviously illuminates. So it's like, it destroys, it illuminates, and then it fructifies. So it's like really dramatic and unpleasant, obviously, if you get hit by it. But it has the potential to generate new life. And obviously, like, the tower comes halfway through, well, not halfway through, but not at the end of the story. We've still got more cards in the major arcana after this, so it's not the end. It's not the end of the story. So we know that there is some, the star comes next, which is a really hopeful, beautiful card. So yeah, I find it really shocking. And I feel like since we talked about it last week, I've kind of summoned it into my life. And like, it's been with me as a presence throughout the last week, just like occasionally thinking about it or seeing little things that remind me of it. And after spending a week with it, I feel a lot more chill about it than I would if I just laid it down in a reading previous to that.
I got it in my spread yesterday for possible outcome.
Really?
Yeah, I get kind of excited when I get it. I mean, I know it's like when you're in the midst of it, it fucking sucks. But then there is that element of leveling up, or that element of seeing something you haven't seen before, that I also find really exciting. Like, there's a lot of possibility and transformation in this card. But yeah, like when you're in the middle of that lightning storm, it's like you don't want to be on top of that hill, But I think it's so interesting, the juxtaposition there, or the paradox of like the reveal being like really, revealed and destruction going together. Like I think that's a really interesting paradox.
Yeah, so I just got this video yesterday someone sent me, and it's these molds to make like towers of dirt. And I did not tell this person that we were going to be talking about the tower card, but this person sent me this video, and these women have like constructed these forms so that the seeds for plants can germinate on this tower. So as it's closed inside of this casing, it's germinating seeds, the soil is being formed into a tower, and then once the seeds are germinated at some point, they're able to open up the mold, and all that stands anymore is just this tower of soil with a bunch of, root systems and things like that that's all holding it together. And then the interesting thing was, she was like, yeah, well, this is meant to crumble. So it would fall, but it would be providing native plants, so plants that are from that region, a space to grow, and then they just kind of like, the seeds can also send out, much easier if they're wind pollinated, or even I guess if they were insect pollinated, but you know the seeds can travel further because they're on this big tower. So I thought that was interesting, and yeah, like I said, this was unprovoked, so it's also been coming up for me in really interesting places.
Maybe that's also interesting. The idea that towers are meant to crumble eventually. And like the more we make peace with that, the I think the better of a relationship we can have with it. Like it crumbling, it's not bad luck or an accident. It's kind of it closing its own life cycle or something.
I love that. It's so funny because I was on the plane ride, I was listening to a conversation with Bayo Akamalafe, who was talking about architecture and how architects often have a very contentious relationship with decay. You know, they pride themselves on the robustness and the integrity of the structure, but that eventually all structures, you know, crumble. And yeah, just sort of trying to, you know, wouldn't it be sort of interesting if more architects or they had a better relationship or were thinking about decay in the process more so. And then, so anyways, I'm curious, Issa, like your perspective on that, being an architect, having that background.
I remember having this conversation that happens often at some point in school where someone was talking about, yeah, you know, there's this temple in Japan that is the longest standing temple of any faith that is still practiced or whatever. It's been around for more than however many thousand years or something. But then when you actually look into the temple, they tear it down and they build it again every couple decades because it's made out of wood. So of course it cannot be like, it's not the same original pieces of wood that were there when it was first made 1,000 years ago. And the question was, well, is it the same temple then? If it's not the same piece of wood. And I don't know, it was really interesting for me. I was like, well, I think it is, because as long as people have the same relationship with it, why does it matter if it's the same piece of wood or not? But now that I'm in Europe, it's very different, right? Because everything here is just a bunch of rocks. It's true. Everything is just stone walls everywhere and castles. And it's interesting, I think, this idea of permanence, or this idea of, yeah, something that can change. It's not even decay, but it's also the possibility of it to, I think, adapt with its context. I also remember reading an essay from Ivan Illich about also housing and buildings, and he was saying that there's he was being very critical of like modern housing being these concrete cubes and things, but he was talking about like when before, I don't know, people built their own little homesteads and you could see how the house would change with the family. So it's like the kids are growing up and there's more, the house got bigger and then the kids leave and then the house gets smaller and it turns into, I don't know, space for chickens or whatever. And like the house itself kind of breeds and modifies with the people in it. And I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of architecture that is not done considering this aliveness of structures and the possibility for them to adapt and to move and to also eventually decay. Like there's some people that are about like, oh, make it with recyclable materials. It's like, yeah, but that's also not entirely it. It's something, but it's not the same. Making a building out of recyclable materials is not the same as making a building that is meant to fall apart. Right. It's a really interesting question.
Well, what was coming to mind while you were talking was the Mars, the kind of like the dual nature of Mars, if we think about it in the context of Mars and Scorpio versus Mars and Aries, because Scorpio is that kind of like from the underground. And this can be like in regards to information too. So like Mars in Scorpio is the strategic war general, where Mars in Aries is like always taking action. So I feel like there's something in there about strategic action, and but it also being a part of this thing like recognizing decay. That's a very Scorpio theme. and like that transformation of life and death, and just the living nature of whatever is constructed. And I guess something about it always needing to evolve. That feels very Martian.
I've been thinking, as you guys know, because someone was going on about it, about the Protestant Reformation a lot lately, but specifically because I was walking with a friend through some ruins in town near where I live. And there's a priory there. It's not quite as impressive as Glastonbury Abbey, but it's like pretty nice. It's pretty nice ruin. And I believe it was torn down as part of that, as part of the Protestant Reformation. And I was just thinking like how interesting it is, because we were sitting on these, we're actually sitting really high up on a little sticking out bit, and meditating. And I was thinking about everything I've been reading about that time in history and stuff, and just sort of trying to feel into what it was like to be in these ruins at this time, and how, I'm interested in this period because I think it's a significant moment in the history of ritual, right? And when I read about this period, I do tend to, obviously, despite all the financial stuff, I can't help but be on the side of the Catholics because they have the ritual game. And yet, like, it's almost like, so if Mars is like the aggressor that's tearing down the tower, or like this horrible, angry mouth down here, breathing fire onto the tower, it seems like he's an outside enemy attacking the tower. But if you take another step back and see him as part of the system, then he's like a part of it, right? And it needs to be torn down. And I was thinking about that, and thinking about the Protestant Reformation and that clash between, the iconoclasts coming in and smashing up all the beautiful temples that these guys had made. But like, if I can force myself to take a step back from that position and see, well, they needed to be destroyed so that the faith could evolve, so that like, and everything, yeah, I don't even know what I'm saying now, but like, it was just this moment of sitting there and meditating, being like, oh, I don't get to be here unless that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's true of literally every tragedy, because everything's connected. And that's a weird thing about the world and history.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's a tower too. Like, kind of what came to mind when you're talking there was like, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And so this sense of like getting really high, and having maybe getting too high to where you're losing actually the perspective of what's on the ground, like maybe you're getting, so it's, because my sense is so much about life is trying to give us as many perspectives as possible, like sometimes it just feels like it's this, it's the guy with the world, but it's actually more of a crystal sphere. And you just keep turning it to see what kind of light refracts or what kind of images you get. And yeah, if you stare at it with one position for too long, you're missing the myriad and diversity of being and of living. And that it's the fall in some ways it is kind of that calling to come back to the ground, maybe get the perspective of the ants or the worms. I mean, kind of that thing looks kind of wormy too on that Thoth card. To not forget like that actually every angle and every being has its own beauty and unique perspective that is important to understand.
Every new beginning comes from some other beginnings. And
what is y'all's perspective on the light? Yeah, the fact that the light destroys, because again, it's a little bit of an inverse of like what is normally, light makes things grow, light makes things better, light is beauty, and this is like kind of like light also destroys and blinds, and yeah, there's a paradox there.
I'm thinking of light revealing, and the revelation
too.
being, yeah, because I think there's like some kind of requirement for artifice. Like it's art, right? It's not reality. And that kind of really like brutalist attempt to strip away all kind of trickery and artistry and stuff in life and just see things for the plain facts as they are can end up turning you into a horrible nihilist.
Mhm.
And that destroys you.
Mhm.
For some reason, my thoughts went first to how the darkness saves us from the light,
Mhm.
or is like a reprieve from the light in that like context, with the light being penetrating and piercing.
Yeah, I was noticing like some shadows from a tree, and on the ground, and there was something so cool. It was like the shadows allowed for so much imagination. Like if I didn't know the tree was there and I just had the shadows, there was this kind of really beautiful sense of being able to kind of fill in the gaps. Like there was so much creativity that could come alive from just seeing the shadows. But then when you look up at the tree, like it's defined, then at that point it's not to say foreclosed upon, but it's like that's what it is. And so it does I mean there's something so, and even looking at my own shadow, like I was dancing with my shadow the other day, and it was so fun. Like it's just the outline, and to be able to not actually fill in those details was really fun. Uh
Oh,
yeah,
that's
so there's something about the light, yeah, where it reveals but then you're kind of then locked in a way. Like it's like naming, when you name something you kill it, like
mm,
that phenomenon.
that no that but that's that reminded me this you talking about shadows. I think when I was a kid, we were, I don't know, somewhere, I think in Prague, and we went to this, I don't know, there's a name for it that I don't remember now, but basically like a shadow play where there's a screen and the actors are behind and all you see is just the shadows, and they use different like props and things, and it's really it's really nice when it's that way, because exactly like you're you're not, how can I say it? Like whatever shape the shadow makes is something that you're making it to be that is not who's behind, but it doesn't really matter, right? That's the whole point, is that this, what is somehow material and real, can be kind of distorted or reshaped into another possibility, and something is not what it quote unquote is, right? It's not what it seems like under the light. And I think that's interesting. It's the same thing. I have a similar feeling as you, Holly. This idea that light is nice, but then it can be also this bit of a trap where you think that by seeing something, you know something, um, and it becomes. I think this is a bit everywhere, right? This dependency we have on sight and how this is linked to light. So yeah,
Says the lady from the dark.
The shadow.
Yeah, I'm now picking up on that duality between the feminine and the masculine, and like you were saying, like naming things, the masculine, like this is what it is and there's no other way to look at it, when there's, you know, a space of imagination that actually doesn't exist here, but it exists.
Mm.
And so there is actually different ways that that jewel can be turned and looked at differently, but you have to kind of pan out to that perspective of observing the hand holding the jewel instead of just the jewel itself, like from the perspective of the hand.
Yeah, there's agency to move it.
Yeah.
We're not stuck. I mean, I think that's part of what the naming or the light, like that's the trap. It can get us where the thing no longer becomes the dynamic kind of becoming, but we box it in as a static thing. Um, I don't know how that relates to the hand, but oh, I guess it does because it's like you can move it, and so it doesn't stay static. But then also like with that being able to turn it, being able to discern too, like the distortions and
Yeah, I kind of want to beat Rebecca to mentioning this is very phallic.
What?
I just took it from you. And so that's interesting, like that masculine principle coming up there too, is like this tower. It's straight up and erect, and then it goes crashing down into the abyss, into the darkness there that we can't really see what's happening, but it's like at some point that principle will crumble and there will be new life coming from it because that's the divine feminine, but that is I can't believe I kind of just noticed officially because of that, but yeah.
No, I
Also-
didn't notice either. And I have a reputation for noticing phalluses.
No, well, talking about
Apparently.
phalluses. No, I just quickly wanted to say that you saying that, Sarah, reminded me of how often powers are in, I don't know, general literature or lore of life are evil, right? Like, how many books and things have you read that the center of evil villains and things is in a tower? Or people are locked in a tower, or people.
the
So,
princess
is it really that bad if it crumbles then? If it was evil to begin with.
Well, I mean, I think the Rider-Waite it's referencing Babel, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Which is because that's kind of like you were saying about when the tower falls and the people inside are brought back down to earth, literally humbled. That was God's plan, right? When he destroyed Babel, he was like, let's all these people have got too big for their boots. Sarah, correct my biblical scholarship, please. Think they
You
can
do
reach up
great.
to me here, God? I'm going to teach them a lesson. And he smashes it down and then scatters them so they can't speak to each other anymore. And which makes kind of creates darkness because they don't understand each other. So there's a lack of understanding, which allows for, well, war and all sorts of horrible things, but also there's some play. So again, there's some imagination working between these people.
Yes, as someone that was out of country for 6 weeks, and Issa's mentioned this before in another chat too, just like how humbling it is to not be able to speak the same language as other people. But then that does give you access to play. It does give you access to being more childlike or more open, at least. And there was also just to like bring it full circle and just that naming things and the languages, and now you've mentioned the Tower of Babel and all these people not being able to. So there's something about the word that is very interestingly part of this. And then, like, of course, in the Christian faith, the word is Christ. So yeah, I don't know. And then, I mean, I'm going to take it really far out, but Christ is a representation of the Kairos, is that what it's called? The turning point, like a huge turning point in history. And so that's also something here too, that death of Christ and the rebirth. I don't know, really, the imagery is coming up for me about the word and the Kairos and a big turning point, but it kind of needing to die in order for that to happen.
Just going to go off on a tangent. I was going to ask if you guys had heard of accelerationism. It's this kind of political philosophy that I don't really know anything about, but what I do know, or what I think I know, is that they believe that a tower moment is coming in our culture and that it is inevitable and that in the long run something better will happen afterwards, and so we should just push harder on all the things that are taking us towards it and accelerate our progress towards it. And I feel like, I mean, I don't know anything about politics. I don't really have opinions in that realm, but I've certainly been at moments in my life where I've been like, I'm fucking up and I'm just going to go harder because it's the only way I'm going to learn this lesson.
I see.
Yep. Relatable.
Having recently read a book that goes so deep into extinctions,
Mhm.
I feel like one of the takes I have is that I don't know if what comes after an extinction or this collapse of something is better. It's just
Mm.
different.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is more complex life better, or is it more variation of certain plants better? Like that, I don't know. But what I get from it is that every time whatever new predominant life form that starts to take over the world um is just so different, and each of those worlds was so different. Um so that's kind of the that's kind of the feeling I have when it comes to things collapsing. I don't know if collapse leads to something better necessarily.
Mhm.
It can, but I don't think that's the default to be expected. I think when some things fall apart, whatever gets rebuilt after it is just another version of something. But yeah, I'm not too sure where I stand on that.
Mhm.
I think it's like thinking in cycles, and that like if you're at the end of the cycle and everything is tending towards destruction and ruin, then you think, well, the next cycle will be better because you're only thinking about the beginning of the next cycle, and like and like it will be hopeful and great, and then the sort of apex of that cycle, if you think about it in civilizational terms, like everyone will be all enthusiastic and will be fighting or whatever for our new civilization to work and to make it all happen, and then we'll be at the top and everything will be great. And compared to where I am now at the end of a dying civilization, that sounds good. But again, like maybe this is one of the things this card is asking us to do, is like to force us to step back, because we keep talking about stepping back and panning out and seeing things in a bigger in the bigger picture of things. Because yeah, I totally agree, Issa. Like it's not, why would it be better? It's just different. But because stasis is so bad, I guess that's what makes us think that change is better and change has to be for the better, because change is better than staying still. So maybe the actual situation that you move into isn't better, but the fact that you moved is better than staying still. Something like that.
Well, I also just wonder too about like intimacy, like that each time you go through the cycle and you go through it again, and you're just like with our rituals and our relationships, it's like they kind of get deeper and deeper. And so the shape shifting continues to happen. And I agree, it's like you're moving from like a mug into a bowl into a vase, like it's not like one's better than the other, but there's something again about grace or about intimacy of being able to move with the cycles with greater grace. So it's like you start to recognize, oh, I'm in a tower moment, whereas before I might like clench and resist, but now I can see it actually as a really compassionate hand. And so it's not necessarily it's the next shape is better, but there's a sense of being able to move, to be molded and shaped with greater ease or with grace or with a little bit more clarity, and then being able to find the affordance or the benefit of that phase of the cycle. What the beauty of autumn, the beauty of winter. It's not like you still don't go through that darkness, but you can start to find kind of the joy hidden in it in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting to have that retrospective look at it being better, because I kind of was thinking on the same lines of, yes, there are a lot of people that anything is better than here. And so moving to the next, iteration of whatever human life looks like, yeah, they're like running to it because they do believe it's better. So that's interesting that you mentioned, Holly, the ability that we have to kind of retrospectively look at these tower moments and realize with those, revolutions, each time we hit a tower moment, being able to look back, that's kind of wisdom that life gives you, is that these places where you feel really stuck or stagnant are providing actually a lot of options and a lot of guidance, but you have to have a lot of trust. And that's something we've been talking about, Rebecca. And I think that's why I was telling Rebecca this was probably going to come up, just like our natural conversation about just like what's happening in life. And I think we can kind of all relate to, because we said the card kind of keeps coming up, whether it's physically or in situations. And yeah, I think that this tower moment that I'm standing in, I'm moving through much more slowly than I usually do. And well, Holly mentioned to me that me giving up air, I'm losing my words. Sometimes I can't find them. But what I am really able to hold on to and manifest is this steady patience, the sitting and waiting for the tower to crumble. I mean, it's great, to also take the leap of faith, but I do think that, like, instead of provoking a tower that wasn't actually going to, how can I put this? It's like imagining I'm in a different tower than the tower that I'm actually in. So it's like what I'm doing is taking past iterations of these tower moments and applying them to now and saying it's happening again. Oh, this is the same tower I've been trapped in. It's like that Eye of Sauron on the top. It's like that one. But really, this tower is more like, Rapunzel's tower or something like that. It's like something I could easily like rappel down or, get out of. And so I don't know that that's always going to be the case in the future, that it will always feel like, oh, this is getting easier, this is getting easier. But I can sense in this particular tower moment that I'm facing that I do find strength in past iterations of being in a tower and realizing that this isn't the same tower.
Yeah. I'm probably realizing that there's always a way out of the tower, whether it crumbles or whether you climb down or bungee jump or something. I don't know, but yeah, it's true. I think whenever these tower moment comes, and it's a new tower, as you say it, I like that analogy. It feels like the world is ending, and then you go through it and you realize, oh, okay. And then when another one of that same kind comes, then you're like, well, it's still very hard, but at least I've been through this once, so I know that life will go on. I'll probably be okay. And then you actually become extremely grateful for those tower moments.
Yeah, because stagnant is one thing, but also like this card evokes for me a lot of vulnerability. Like they're on top, like especially this one, she's like on top sitting like on this hill, like really exposed, like really, really vulnerable. And the thing that came up was the word Rebecca mentioned the other day of surrender. Like that's also part of ways of dealing with it, is surrendering to the movement, to the cycle, surrendering to the process. And again, like using that analogy of like a divine hand shaping us, and can I make myself like malleable clay? Can I make myself good material through which the hand can shape me? Rather, because we've all worked with material, food, whatever, like art material, where the thing just doesn't, like it's like showing a lot of resistance versus really good, we know that good quality material when we have it. And so going through all of these cycles, can I then, knowing them, getting intimate with the cycles and knowing how they work. This is why this wheel work we do, I think, is so critical and important, is then when we go through that, we make ourselves just more, we make ourselves good material through which the divine can shape us.
I think to be that good material does require, well, to do that surrendering does require trust. And that's what, like, I was talking to someone the other day and he was really despairing about the state of the world and everything. And like, not that I think everything's great, but I just can't get into that really despairing space because I, like I don't just believe, I know the sun will come up again because I've seen it so many times. I've been sitting on a hill watching it rise, and just observing, the cycle, the wheel of the year for so long, and being, committed to enacting it in ritual and stuff. And it's just like, it's not just, it's not just like an idea I have, a notion I have, or a hope I have. It's like deep embedded knowledge that makes me be able to trust, in a way that I think he was struggling to do in that moment.
Mm.
And it, like, I think and that like being fully like connected or whatever, and not that anyone can be fully, but you know what I mean, being like having that feeling of wholeness and connection with the ecosystem you live in, and I mean that, literally, and also like the imaginal ecosystem, like all of it, just being hooked up. You don't build towers in that situation, like you just live on the ground. Because the tower is the man-made structure, right? You don't get any towers in nature. Maybe you do, like on the coast, you get those amazing rock stacks. But very rarely would you see a tower that's not made by human beings. And kind of like stuff that's made by human beings is, by its very nature, mortal, just like human beings are mortal. So just not investing too much, like you're putting your trust in the right place, putting your trust in the cycles, the big and small cycles, and not putting your trust in shit that some dude built. Whatever that is, whether that's an identity or an ideology or a literal building. Like,
Or yourself. Like, if you build yourself around what a man thinks, and not just men, but like, like the masculine principle, like what the collective idea of what I should do, the authority internally, like all that, has such a big impact on when we feel like we're so constricted that there's nothing else to do but jump from the tower, or something like that. Like, it feels like, I mean, it's all like, it's very personal what I think, obviously. So that's why I'm like, what a man thinks, because obviously that's my tower. But yeah, I felt like that was still something that is, like, universally still something that isn't necessarily truth with a capital T, but in our shadow, like in our shadow state, I think that we can value too much what other people think of us, to the point where we're not willing to take that leap, or even just be with the crumbling in a peaceful state, like, being with the crumbling, but it's like all panicky and like my whole world's ending. And I think there's something here that's coming into my mind right now that's about how you are in relationship with the tower falling is really important too. And that, I think, is speaking to your what you were just saying about ritual. That is being in relationship in some way with these tower moments, or like being in relationship with yourself to the extent that the tower moments don't have this terrible impact. Like, it's just something like you can ride the wave a little bit because you've got this consistency, that through line that runs through, which is the wheel.
Holly was just saying before we started recording about studying attachment theory. Is that where the idea of the secure base comes from? That's what we're talking about, right? Like, if you have a secure base, you don't have to build a tower. And if you do and it falls, it's okay, because you can just fall back into your secure base.
Yeah, or you can do like they do in Japan, where they put these skyscrapers on little individual platforms. Because if the building, if there's an earthquake, it would, like, the different forces in different directions, that's what breaks the structure of a building and collapses. So what they do is that they put the entire building on, like, I don't know, not a trampoline, but like the base that it's on has like some capacity for movement. which means that when there's an earthquake, the whole base of the building moves with the earthquake. So the whole tower moves, and that's actually stops them from collapsing. The fact that the whole building can move. So there's something also not having a base, but even having a moving base. I was thinking of that. But the other thing I was thinking, I think what you said, Holly, with like the clay making you, that's a discussion that is very, very, very prominent and present to me right now, because I'm in a place where people are constantly making out of a variety of materials, and there's always this conversation of like, well, when you make something, was it 100% your intention, or was it like a reciprocal thing, or to what extent did the material dictate the final product, and then what is that relationship, and then if you allow for the material to do things, then does it mean you're not the author, or you don't have full agency, and these sort of things. So that's always an ongoing discussion, and some people would say no, an artist needs to be in full control of everything they do, and other people here too like to think that, well, yes, but full control also means allowing for mistakes, allowing for a degree of another entity doing things to you. Like you allowing for that is also part of the agency. So I guess that made me think also with the tower moments you were talking about, Sarah, and I think you touched upon it to some extent when you said it's also in the relationship and the attitude you have towards these, because I feel like if you feel like the tower crumbling is something that happens to you and you have kind of no agency in it, that is very different from feeling like, oh no, maybe I want this tower to crumble, or maybe maybe I'm also an agent in making this tower crumble in a way. Yeah, or maybe the tower crumbling is not something that happens and I'm a victim of, but it's just another process. I don't know, all those things were coming up for me.
Yeah, it's not because of a man. That's what...
It's okay, I share that tower too, Sarah. I'm in it there too.
Yes. I do like this idea of the steady base, and so, oh gosh, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna invoke John Vervaeke. I have to. It's like now that's part of my job. But there's this analogy that he has that we would always use for rug pull moments. And so, like, rug pull moments are these tower moments. This is like exactly what we're describing when we talk about a rug pull moment. So, like, a perfect example of rug pull moments for me have been with faith, with men. Like, so what he's describing, John Vervaeke, is that hourglass, and how the sand drops, and then it like forms a tall cone, like a tower, and once that there's like one more grain of sand that lands at the top of that tower, and then it just all crumbles down. And so these are the rug pull moments. But like you're saying, like if the base is stable, then the tower might grow to a certain point, but then it kind of crumbles down. Like it doesn't exceed that point at which it no longer can have structure.
Yeah, this is interesting, because I mean, I'm thinking also in terms of like, these are psychological structures, right? These are psychological structures. And I think part of what can make it also this card so difficult is the rate of change, like the suddenness sometimes, right? So you don't, the rug pull moment, like you're saying, you're just chilling in your tower and then, like out of nowhere. And the rate of change of like what that does to your sense of identity, your relationships to other and world and self, can be obviously like really discombobulating, and just that's what can make it. These aren't necessarily gradual changes, but like a sudden like. But then, as you're talking there, Sarah, I was thinking about sandcastles and like, so building structures, actually going back to building structures that are meant to fall away, So there is something here for me happening where like the material, like the attitude again, and the material that you use to build these structures and or psychological structures, or, you know, physical structures. But if you can build with the attitude that actually this is meant to actually to be swept away by the ocean. It's actually meant to go, it's meant for the ocean to grab it and like feed on it. And I don't know, that you can have so much more fun than playing in building these towers or these structures with that knowledge or that intention or that attitude of like, and at some point, like maybe this is all just gonna give feedback into the great ocean of being and of our origin. I think we, you know, it's hard when we fool ourselves into thinking that, yeah, this is a lot of stuff on identity here about who we are. And yeah, like this sense of, again, permanence or yeah. Something in there. I'm just enjoying the idea of like building structures, like psychological structures made of sand, you know, like that are strong and that can pact, but like that I know are also meant, like the purpose of building it actually is to enjoy it very briefly and then have it actually enjoy it kind of being taken by the ocean.
And recognize it in others as well. Because that's
yeah.
Allow other people to change and their towers to fall. Because there's always the fear, or that's a fear that I sometimes have, that people expect me to, you know, believe the same things that I professed last week or last month or like whatever. Like, and I think I don't know whether I'm tempted to say that it's even worse today, because everything's on the internet and there's this kind of weird sense of permanence, whereas like this is being recorded, right? It's not just a casual chat that like, I mean, it is just a casual chat, but there's something different about the quality of recorded media than just a conversation amongst ourselves that we're not recording. And even if we're not recording it, just having it put through the filter of the camera and the microphone and all of that apparatus just makes it feel a lot more like you're being locked into something. And I find myself saying maybe and perhaps and I don't know all the time, almost like as you know, like some kind of apotropaic sigils to like ward off people thinking that anything I say is like permanent, or anyone I am is permanent, and trying to buy myself the room to change. And I feel like that's almost like a kind of countercultural act now, to say I might change. Like today I think this, tomorrow I might think differently. And to be open to change feels like, yeah, it feels like something that's forbidden in our culture right now, which is mental because it means you force everyone into towers.
I was gonna say, well, there's some words you said there, Rebecca, like and the phrase that comes up for me is like the permanence of the word or the permanence of word. Somehow that being a very succinct description of the tower in a way, or at least the one type of tower. Because that was Babel, right? It's like also the permanence of language, the permanence of word, and not as in word.
Yeah, like documenting things, because that also I'm like noticing something here about something like very fixed, and the way that we relate with those structures that we build. So like, yeah, there's a lot of themes that seem to be kind of reappearing in this conversation. And part of it has to do with like what you were saying, like once you put a name on something or once you put the light on something, then it's stuck. But then also there's something here that I'm kind of contradicting myself, because that lightning comes through and so the light actually deconstructs. But I don't know, like there does seem to be some themes that continue to repeat that aren't exactly what I expected, because I was like, death and rebirth, that's what we're going to talk about the whole time, but that hasn't necessarily been the conversation.
Someone said the other day to me they'd been through a hard time and they were like, well, thank God I kept a journal, because now I can like look back on that time and see what was really going on, because I was so, you know, caught up in the situation at the time. And I was like, yeah, thank God. And then I thought, well, actually, I don't know, because what is the past like you can. I've never kept a journal like that, like writing down events, recording things that happen to me in detail. And that means that I have, my memory is obviously like every human memory flawed. Mine might even be more flawed than the average, I don't know. But like, so I'm groping around in the dark to construct stories about the narrative that led me to this point. And again, thinking about that beauty of darkness and unknownness and being able to reach into that weird void that is the past and imagine what maybe happened there. Like, obviously you've got some vague sense, but you don't know what jumper you were wearing when so and so said something to whatever. That's all made up. The order that things happened in is also made up often. Like all this, the exact words that were said, etc. And there's a kind of beauty to that fluidity.
Mm.
So yeah, maybe that thing of recording, it seems like such a gift, and like that thing where you name something, you kill it. I was just thinking about how like people, before you know the words for things, how do you relate to things? Are they more flexible and malleable?
Yes. Well, I don't know, but this was something interesting because I've been doing walking meditations and I listen on the Waking Up app to especially Alan Watts, and he's got that quote where he's like, everything was a wiggle. Everything was a wiggle. Like nothing was differentiated. There was no straight lines. And we know this about like evolutionary biology too, where like caves, they had like curved walls. It wasn't like all these really straight form, structures and things like that. So that is interesting that you brought that up.
It's interesting you bring up the memory thing too, because then they've shown, like, I remember learning this in my psych classes of there's evidence that like our long-term memory is actually infinite, that there's some part of us that actually, because there's some people with this eidetic memory where you can go, well, okay, on May 4th in 1991, where were you, and they can name what they were wearing, the color socks, and I think it's pretty torturous for those people, because it's like, actually there's such a gift in being able to forget. But it's really interesting because there's some mechanism in our body that remembers like everything, but thank God, like our short-term memory, that our recall is not, can't go dig into that. And they've shown all kinds of, like, when people witness crimes, it's just so unreliable, like they don't remember shit very well. So yeah, like testimony's often not even very, very reliable. But where was I going with it? See, I forgot already, like where but what's cool is I'm going to go back to this art material metaphor, because it's almost like we gather in all this information and we have actually, it's stored somewhere kind of beyond our recall. But it almost feels like it's like the tools, or like they're materials to which then we can reconstruct like I've always felt that the past is totally malleable, like that there's certain things that are unchangeable to an extent, but our ability to reconstruct it is, so it's like some of the materials you can't change, but then the way you order them and rearrange them are up for grabs. And again, going back to like trying, like living in a way where we try to gain as many different perspectives as possible, that's often what it feels like, going into the past and reorganizing and reordering it and trying to see it from as many different possible angles as we can in order to get the wholeness to come forward, It's wild we can do that.
Yeah. So what comes to mind for me obviously is astrology, because I use my journals for that very same reason, but not to access exact clothes, people I was talking to. I document my feelings. And that is nice to be able to reference back to. But what you find is you feel differently about things when you reread them. So you do have that kind of ability to reconstruct and see it as a wiggle, and allow it to bend into a different shape. So that is, I think, where astrology is a really valuable tool to to have a language for feelings. What does it feel like when Mars is in Taurus, or you know, these kinds of things. And this, like, the tarot cards really help with this too, but that's a way that memories and history is still accessible, because it's like, oh, this feeling's coming back around, oh, this energy's coming back around, and I know what that feels like. And there's something in there too, because we were talking about Tower of Babel, and just to like bring it back, something about understanding and how you can understand things from many different languages, many different perspectives. And we're also saying, like, pan out to the outer zoomed of like many towers. There's lots of towers. So yeah, I think that, I don't know, I'm sensing this connection and this relationship with having the ability to well, I think we've already mentioned it, but like the benefit of that tower, and seeing like in the retrospective view, like being able to look back and say, oh, times were bad, now they're better, or whatever it is. Or I think we were talking too about like being able to reference the past, and how that's a tool that we can utilize for seeing these tower moments as less I don't know, tragic. I think that's probably an okay word to use here. Like, so bad.
I was
Yeah.
just thinking about how, like, you know, those bad guys who build those towers and then like conduct their evil empires from the top of them. They're all about control, right? That's their thing. That's the archetypal bad guy in the top of the tower. He wants to control everyone below him, and that's kind of what we're talking about like, there are things that are not controllable, things that are in the dark, things that are unknown, and letting them have their space and not trying to control everything, whether that's like, you know, your life or your identity or your like your family or whatever it is, whatever the how people see you, whatever the thing is you're trying to control. um yeah, like accepting that in, like, if you were successful in building a high tower and then looking down from the top and controlling everything you see from beneath it, that tower will by definition fall, because you've not allowed space for the stuff you can't control. You've not, yeah, and it's good that it does. So maybe it's like like as you go through life, you just keep building shorter and shorter towers until eventually you can just sit on the ground and be happy.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Well, there's something memory coming up for me, because very recently I had to read some wacky French philosopher called Deleuze, and he goes hardcore into his critique of memory. If I understand correctly, for him the only real memory is short-term memory. For him, long-term memory is exclusively narrative. That's not memory, that's story. That's something causal that you make up to explain things. It's not real memory. So for him, the only real memory is more of that short-term kind of flow state, in the moment, reciprocal feedback, making choices kind of thing that doesn't fully get registered. That's what he feels it's true memory. So it's more systematic, and so I thought that was interesting. But I guess when I'm thinking of memory, also because I'm reading another book now about seeing like a state, which is all about how, well, governments try to simplify the world into measurable things. And I feel like those guys in the tower trying to control everything are also, well, memory has to be part of that too, right? They need to be able to remember everything, or document everything. But then to document everything, you need to reduce the world into these very simplistic, measurable things. So when you were saying earlier that things that are not controllable, things that cannot be seen, I was also thinking, okay, maybe things that cannot be memorized, maybe that's not the right word, but things that are not memorable, memorable, I don't know what's I don't know what's the word there, but yeah, things that cannot be turned into memory, basically.
I don't know, like this thought that keeps coming up for me is the symbology of the tarot and how it evolves over time. And there's something still very fixed about the tarot cards because, like, you have so many different types of decks and you have so many different iterations of those cards, and they had to kind of adapt and adjust to what was kind of allowed during certain times, and how, like, I'm imagining the tarot deck as like expanded as like a, I don't know, like an accordion style, and it's like a tower if you turn it up this way, but it's got like lasting capability. It's got like memory in its malleability. There's something about like the way that people can relate with these cards and their symbols in them and anything like text, whatever. As long as people don't get too fixated on this means this is truth, this is what it
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
then there's, I don't know, like more play, like what Holly was talking about, like that ability to be less serious about it. Like, I don't need to defend these cards or my understanding of them because it's very fluid. It's wiggly.
Well, it's funny because the word that was coming up for me in looking at this card too is promise. Because it's like part of what is so painful about the tower experience is you feel like a promise has really been broken. You know, it's something you like, it's almost like you made a vow with something, or and then the promise got broken. But then of course, like as we're sort of talking about that, with that promise breaking and kind of almost a new promise gets made, like one promise ends and a new promise begins, and where's the, you know, the beginning end and then the beginning. But I guess it's also like ensuring, it's also like a call to like what, you know, where are the promises that are really, I don't want to say unbreakable, but like those things that like where you really trust in that, again, trust in that vow, like trusting in the promise of gravity, you know, trusting in the promise of the earth to hold us. And so anyways, the word promise just kept coming up because I was just sensing into how painful it is when a promise gets broken, when you feel like a promise that you've made with something or yourself or somebody or whatever gets broken. And so it's also like, I don't know, there's something here about checking your promises or what, you know, checking your vows, or it's a little bit of a tangent from what we were just talking about, but it's what's coming alive.
Amor fati came to mind.
Yeah.
Like that's the ultimate promise, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a negative way that, like, of course, like humorously, that was how I thought of it to begin with. I was like, well, we got one promise for certain. But yeah, I don't know. That is an interesting contemplation of that, the hurt of a promise being broken, and why that makes these, like when this card comes up, it makes it so tense. But I do like how you flip that, Holly, and say like this gets me excited because it's like something is on the horizon, and that's a promise. Like I don't know what it is, and it might blow my mind. It might be way better than I expected, but if I'm holding on, like I still imagine this image of this, I think it's Jesus holding a big teddy bear behind his back, and there's this like, but he's got this little girl in front of him, and
Is it the
she's got.
Catholic tradition or what
Yes, we all study this very image. It's very symbolically, culturally, historically. Yes, we hold on to this one with dear pride. Anyway, America. Sorry. It's Independence Day. So this girl is standing in front of this figure, clearly like Christ or embodying something that could give her the gifts. And he's got the big teddy bear behind his back, but he's got her little teddy bear in front of her. And she's like, but I want it. And he's like thinking like, oh, but I have something so much better. But you just have to be willing to give up the small teddy bear. It's interesting how that's the opposite of giving up the big tower, but yeah.
I know, I'm so confused. Maybe that's another purpose of the card, to just throw everything in the air and confuse you. Because I was going back to thinking about the secure base and that whole theory, and like as far as I understand it, is it's like this dude, John Bowlby, he said that if promises are consistently broken to children, like that their parents will be there when they come home, and when they have trouble, their parents will be there, etc. Those sort of promises of that there's a secure base. Then, as adults, people find it hard to make and trust promises, basically, and then maybe that's wise, because people keep breaking them. So, like, why should you trust? But I think this is why I'm confused, right? Because there's part of me that says we can't be building towers, we can't control everything, we can't control other people, we've just got to like accept the way things are. And then there's part of me that's like, we have to keep making promises and trying, even though it's futile, because it's what it is to be alive and to be human, to fall in love and have another go and say, I don't know, I'm a hip hop cowboy now, what do you think? And like have a go with that identity for a while. like So there's something beautiful in the, like, I'm coming round to seeing the beauty of humanity at this late stage. There's something beautiful that we keep building these towers and trying to like do something. I mean, it's silly, but we've got to do something.
As human.
It's kind of Sisyphusian, right? Like that's the dude who's pushing the boulder up for eternity. And the existentialists interpret that as not tragic, or yes, tragic, but also what we're here to do. And so there's something beautiful in it. And so we keep building our towers, and they keep getting bashed down, and we just keep getting back up again.
Yeah, because I noticed that the way I get through the tower is I lean into the ultimate promise, which feels unbreakable to me, which is that the universe has my back and loves me. Like when all the other promises break or changing, or that one if I can remember that promise, then it's like I get this really wonderful.
It's the trust, but I think it's also feels like the agency I was talking about before. Right? The sense that you're part of this and you're participating, and maybe it's not in a scale that makes immediate sense to your human consciousness, but you're there, and the tower crumbling is not happening to you, it's
With you.
happening for you or with you, exactly. And that really changes things.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to either, like Rebecca said, step back and see the bigger picture, or I don't know, or shift the scale in a way that it's not so much about you and your control over the situation or how you feel about it, but have that trust, and the universe is like, yeah, whatever is happening, it's life and it's beautiful and it's okay.
Yeah, you're participating with the hand, like you're saying. You're participating with that hand.
Yeah, I think that creativity takes us out of that fear state too. Yeah, there's like something there about language and not being able to understand, and how terrifying that is. Like when you're like trying to order food at a place and they don't speak English. And there is something too where there's a lot of identities afforded in that, because nobody knows who I am. I'm a shadow puppet, person behind the veil. So like, there's a lot in this tower that's like buzzing about. But yeah, I think that approaching the tower with the playfulness and the creativity, and even like you're saying, like Isa, if you're participating in fear, so be it. Like this is where you're growing, is facing it. And even if it's like your teeth are chattering and you're shaking, like actually I just went with my mom to have staples removed from her knee after surgery, and it was one of the most like heart-wrenching things for me to see, because my mom is so strong, but this was one of these moments where she was actually scared. And so I'm like holding her hand, talking her through breathing, and like giving her that kind of support. But yeah, I don't know why that came up. It's just, I think I think that modeling that image of the universe having your back, like I'm coming back full circle for my mom to hold her hand during a procedure when she's the one that brought me into this world. So it's like, yeah, something about understanding like the universe is ultimately constructed maybe of love. It's made up of love.
Which can't be destroyed.
Hey.
I don't think you can destroy that.
Yeah, and I think of love as like a process and a cycle as well, because that's I think of everything. And obviously within that process and that cycle, there is, you come around again to destroying each other and destroying yourselves, and then finding a way to love each other again, or to love again, full stop. And that's kind of, you have to do that because love is like the process that makes you, insouls you, and that's what we do for each other, or at least that's my excuse.
Maybe possibly. Disclaimer.
Yeah.
You just spoke some truth, sister.
Perhaps.
Conviction.